Now you'll be relieved to know that I am not going to torture you with terrible guitar playing. What I want to do tonight is I want to talk to you about the philosophy of building scale model railways. So I hear a trainer coming, let's talk about scale model railways. Now some people take their rail modelling fairly casually, but not me. I am a purist. It grieves me to see some of the terrible artistic license that people take with their railways. Now, in England, if you talk about railways, you might think about Mr. Churchward, who was Chief Mechanical Engineer, Locomotive Superintendent and Designer for the Great Western Railway. Or you might think about Thomas Whiteleg, who built locomotives for London Tilbury and Southend Railway. Or you could talk about Herbert Nigel Gresley. Now Mr. Gresley had an office at King's Cross Railway Station, which a few years ago I used to visit long after Mr. Gresley had left and indeed died. And a friend of mine had his old office. Now Mr. Gresley designed, amongst other things, the A4 Pacifics, arguably the most fantastic steam locomotives ever built. One of his engines still holds the world speed record for steam locomotives at 126 miles an hour. A locomotive called Mallard. And if you can't get to England to see Mallard, you could go to the Smithsonian and see Franklin D Roosevelt, I think it's called, or there's the Dominion of Canada, which are sister locomotives. Now, in a lot of places on the frame of Mallard, there were 1 inch bolts. That's to say the diameter of the bolt was 1 inch across. And Mr. Gresley never wanted one of his engines to fall apart. So the bolt went through the frame, and then it had a nut on the bolt, and the bolt was drilled and it had a split pin that went through it to stop the nut coming off the bolt and to stop the bolt coming out of the engine, to stop the engine from falling apart, which at 126 miles an hour would have been quite interesting. Yeah. Interesting? Yes, interesting. Now, if you're going to take modelling seriously, and if you're going to build locomotives that are that big, you should make perfect scale model bolts, and you should drill them, and you should put perfect scale model split pins through those perfect scale model bolts. And that, gentlemen, oh, and ladies, any ladies make model railways? That is the standard that you should work to with your model railways. Anything less is a travesty. Now, of course, this does mean that it takes a long while to build a complete model railway with scale model engines and scale model wagons and carriages and scale model track with all of the pins and spikes and fish plates. So it takes some time, but I'm pleased to be able to show you tonight my Scow model railway. Absolutely perfect in every detail, nothing omitted. Scow model coal, Scow model rivets, Scow model shovels and fire irons, and Scow model connecting rods and crossheads, and half-time reduction gears and Buckeye couplings, and perfect, absolutely perfect. If any of you can find anything wrong with this railway, well, you just better come and tell me. Right, enough waffle, let's look at the railway. Look at that, isn't she a beaut? Look, a perfectly modelled engineer. That's not a young George, is it? With his thumb up and his beard. And the tender behind. And passengers in the carriage. Now this railway, of course, runs in the Wild West. The very Wild West look. And here we have people who don't like railways. Buffaloes that don't like railways. But it's okay, folks, because General Custard is coming to sort them all out with a sheriff. But what's this? Bat Felly and Cheddar George have stolen the stagecoach. Goodness gracious. Well, there we are, folks. A perfect Scow model railway. Perfect in every detail. Ah dear.